Good morning, everyone. The Senate will come out of recess. I call the Senate to order and recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the late session.
All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion to adjourn passes. We are now in the early session. The Senate will be attentive to our chaplain, the Reverend John Hopkins. Good morning.
Morning, everyone. Since it was Martin Luther King Day, the prayer this morning is based on quotes from Dr. King. Let us pray. As the New Hampshire State Senate gathers this day to do the business of the people of the great state of New Hampshire, help them to see the importance of what they do. Remember today that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Help us to bend it more towards justice in our work. It is not always easy to do what is right. Help us to remember that the time is always right to do what is right, and that the ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand in times of challenge and controversy. Help the New Hampshire State Senate to stand up for what is right and good. Help us to remember this day that we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters or perish together as fools. That what we do is not for our own good, but for the good of the people of the state of New Hampshire. Because life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Let us be servants of the sacred trust of being elected officials, seeking the highest good of all people, so that we might let freedom ring from every village and every hamlet, every city. When we let freedom ring in New Hampshire, we'll be able to speed up that day when all God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be joined hands and sing in the words of the old spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Amen.
Thank you. Senator Prentice, I believe you get to do the honors this morning. Are there guests that members want to introduce Senator Carson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Chief Emily Cobb, who currently serves as the police chief for the town of New London. She is a lifelong resident of New Hampshire and began her law enforcement career 18 years ago as a police officer in her hometown of Claremont, and then moved on to the New London Police Department in 2016. She has been serving as chief of police since March of 2020. And most recently, she's been appointed to the New Hampshire Police Standards and Training. Mr. President, I'm honored to stand here today as the sponsor of Senate Bill 29, which eliminates a very antique statute that refers to our women in blue as police matrons. So please join me and welcome our Chief Cobb.
Senator Ray? No. Any further introduction of guests? Seeing none. Without objection, today's fiscal note report is adopted. Seeing no objection. Everybody should have the fiscal note report on their desk. Bills removed from consent, removed by Senator Ward. Senate Bill 39, removed by Senator Perkins Kwoka. Senate Bill 47. We will take those up at the end of the calendar. I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the early session.
No. It was partly my fault.
Okay.
Senator Carson moves. See, I should have done this.
Okay.
Senator Carson moves that the consent calendar with the relevant amendments as printed in the day's calendar be adopted, and that all such bills found ought to pass be ordered to third reading. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the ayes have it. The consent calendar is adopted. Let's see if I do better the next time. Okay, here we go. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 11, an act relative to the African American burial grounds. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Waters for the committee.
Senator Waters, point.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 11 ought to pass with amendment. This bill ensures that New Hampshire will preserve and show respect to burial sites of formerly enslaved African Americans, along with site markers and other related archaeological materials. In Senate Bill 11, if a burial site containing a formerly enslaved African American is discovered, the descendants or descendant community will be consulted for how the remains and materials will be handled. If removal is necessary, as currently regulated in statute, the descendant or descendant community will be consulted on a plan for appropriate historical documentation, signage, and the treatment of the remains. Additionally, if remains, markers, or other related archaeological materials have been removed from a cemetery or burial ground, then the materials will be returned for reburial or placement in consultation with the descendants or the descendant community. If it is deemed to be not feasible or appropriate by the descendants or descendant community, the remains or other materials will be deposited in another suitable location. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee understands that it may not be feasible to require all New Hampshire educational or research institutions, museums, historical societies, or other collections to catalog every item related to the remains or materials of enslaved African Americans by the year 2028. Therefore, the committee voted to adopt an amendment so that as long as the institutions make reasonable efforts to catalog these materials, then they will be in compliance with the law. The Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 11. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any other speakers on Senate Bill 11? Seeing none, the bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 11. Are you ready for the question? All in favor say aye, please. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion ought to pass as amended is adopted, and it's ordered to third reading. The Senate will be further attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 13 FN, an act relative to recovery of search and rescue expenses. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Waters for the committee.
Senator Waters.
Mr. President, I move Senate Bill 13 FN ought to pass. This bill confirms the Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles has the authority to suspend the driver's license of a person who has failed to make payments related to a Fish and Game Department search and rescue operation. Senate Bill 13 was drafted at the request of the department. The suspension of a driver's license for failure to pay back costs related to a search and rescue operation in circumstances of negligence will be used as an incentive tool by the department only when absolutely necessary. Search and rescue operation fees are a necessary offset for costs for the department. The department shall give notice to a person who has failed to repay these fees before their driver's license is requested to be suspended. Once the payments begin, the person will have the suspension of their driver's license lifted. A person may appeal the suspension in a court of law. The Fish and Game Department does not bill every search and rescue operation, only those that have been deemed a result of negligence or recklessness. The purchase of a HikeSafe card exempts someone from the charges. The department will work with the Attorney General's office to determine if the search and rescue operation was necessary as a result of negligence or recklessness. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee asks for your support on the motion about to pass on Senate Bill 13. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. The bill is now on second reading. Is there further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 13. Is everyone ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. The Senate will further be attentive to the clerk. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have sent the prior bill to third reading. Now, the Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 14FN, an act relative to the use of game cameras. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 14FN ought to pass. This bill establishes a definition and guidelines for the use of game cameras. Senate Bill 14FN defines a game camera as any device capable of recording and transmitting photographic or video data, with or without a wire, to a remote device, such as a computer, smartphone, or viewing device. This definition also includes a device that records photographic and video data and stores such data for later use. Senate Bill 14FN also addresses the concerns heard by testimony and requires that all game cameras properly display the name of their owner and contact information. Additionally, no person shall post a game camera on private property unless they obtain written permission to do so, or the property owner posts a sign stating that game camera use is allowed on their property. A game camera placed on state-owned or managed lands shall be exempt from obtaining written landowner permission. Lastly, any written permission will expire on December 31st of each calendar year unless the permission is revoked or extended by the property owner. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 14. FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. The bill is now on second reading. Is there further discussion? Question of Senator Pearl from Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator. So would it be fair to say that this bill, which tries to mediate between privacy rights and hunters' access, is just really essential so that we keep our lands open for hunters?
It is. Thank you for the question. It's important, and we heard a lot of testimony from landowners. They were very concerned about who was accessing their property, and not that they were having an issue with it. They just wanted to know who was there, and they wanted to, have sub-control over the property that are theirs. And, the committee certainly feels very strongly that we need to respect the rights of the landowners while we're trying to keep these lands open so that the hunters can enjoy the privilege of using it. Thank you for the question.
Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 14. Is everyone ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be
Mr. President, the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 15FN, an act relative to the use of tree stands, observation blinds. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Pearl for the committee.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 15FN ought to pass. This bill establishes guidelines for tree stands and observation blinds. Senate Bill 15FN outlines the proper use for tree stands and observation blinds by clearly stating how they may be erected, labeled, and for how long they may be set up. Any tree stand or observation blind must clearly display the owner and contact information for the owner of the tree stand. No person shall damage a tree in erecting a tree stand unless they have obtained the written permission of the landowner beforehand. This includes cutting branches for better angles of sight without the written permission of the landowner. Any temporary tree stand or blind that qualifies under the temporary family must be removed by January 1st unless written permission has been given by the property owner. Lastly, all written permission shall expire on December 31st of each year unless rescinded by the property owner. You'll see that this bill is very similar to Senate Bill 14, and they were put in together so that we could, again, respect the rights of landowners and try and protect that privilege for hunters to access this land. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 15 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 15. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and Senate Bill 15 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred Senate Bill 28, an act relative to a portrait in the likeness of Rogers Johnson at the State House. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 5-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 28 ought to pass. This bill provides that the Joint Legislative Historical Committee may accept a gift of a portrait of Rogers Johnson. Rogers' life was one of accomplishment. He very often would say that he came from very humble beginnings. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy. He was an aide to the Ohio State Senate and achieved a master's in health administration from the University of New Hampshire. He worked for many years in the health insurance field. He also served in the New Hampshire State Legislature as a state representative from 2001 to 2006. During that time, he was selected to be the House Majority Whip, the first African American to hold that position in New Hampshire state history. He was awarded the Black America's Political Action Committee Leader of Tomorrow Award in 2004, the New Hampshire Healthcare Services Award in 2003, and the New Hampshire Business Council's recognition for his support of small business in 2003. He was also a graduate of the Leadership New Hampshire program in 2002. In 2006, then President George W. Bush asked Rogers to serve in the U.S. Department of Education as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. In 2009, he returned to New Hampshire and continued to devote his time to causes that were very important to him. He was a member of the NAACP, as well as president of the Portsmouth branch of the NAACP. He also served as the chair of the Governor's Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, a member of the Governor's COVID-19 Equity Response Team, and the LEAC Commission. While Rogers was focused on making New Hampshire a more diverse and equitable state, he was also known as a devoted family man. He was extremely proud of his wife, Poppy, and his two sons, Jay and Jeremy. Rogers always stood for those who did not have a voice of their own. The hanging of his portrait in the State House will stand as a symbol of inspiration to those who observe his portrait and hopefully inspire others to make positive change through public service, just as he had. The Executive Departments and Administration Committee unanimously asks for your support for the motion of ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may, I would like to just add a couple of personal comments. Rogers and I were first elected to the legislature in the election of 2000, and he was one of the first people that I met for orientation. And Rogers, myself, and my husband, we actually ate lunch together that day, and we forged a lifelong friendship. Not only was he my friend, but he was also someone who I considered to be a mentor. I was someone coming into politics, I really didn't know that much about it, other than to have the desire to serve my community. And whenever I had questions about anything, he was no more than a phone call away, even when he served in Washington. And we continue to have many, many conversations about issues that he felt the legislature should be aware of. And I was able to bring some of his ideas forward and have them put into law. His untimely death, quite frankly, Mr. President, was a loss for his community, his family, and for us here at the State House. And I consider it an honor this morning to be able to speak of him, his life, and his accomplishments. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I too rise in support of Senate Bill 28, and I just wanted to add a few words about my experience working with Rogers Johnson and the extraordinary public record, but to talk a little bit about how he did his work. And most of my experience with Rogers was in the Seacoast branch of the NAACP, and what struck me so much is how he could be very public when circumstances, particularly in our schools, arose and things needed to change. And he could really call it the way things were. He could challenge people. He could speak truth to power, but he also could work very quietly behind the scenes to help school districts and parents and other people just kind of find ways to talk with each other. And I'm so grateful for the work he did in Dover after incidents there, and the Project Dream group that was formed and really healed that community. And I think, I look around here and I see other school districts where he stepped in and, oftentimes using that kind of quiet approach. So we can talk, we can make some changes here and really helped our young people out, because he's just so deeply committed to the young people of the state, making sure that New Hampshire is a place of equal opportunity for them. In a little more public way, I was talking a lot about, he, out of the frying pan into the fire, and he agreed to take on some of the Governor's Commission and the LEAC work. I mean, what a extraordinarily dedicated public service. And, I think, one thing I think about Rogers, that at heart, he really was a statistician, right? And if you want to, he said, I can have my opinions, but I'll show you what the circumstances are. And if you look at the statistical report that he put together for the Governor's Commission, and it's an extraordinary document about what life in New Hampshire is actually like, for different groups. And then when he agreed to serve on the LEAC Commission, we had a lot of conversation about that. And, just think back to that summer with George Floyd, and, the country was roiled up. And of course, New Hampshire, the governor said, let's look into this. And what that LEAC report did, and what it included, what it didn't include, and Rogers and all the other people working that, this is really a great service to this state. And I'm glad there's going to be a picture of Rogers Johnson in the hallways when I come in. It's funny, I was thinking, I was driving this morning, the movie Do the Right Thing, where Spike Lee character says, Sal, why aren't there any pictures of brothers on the wall? And now we'll be able to say, there's Brother Johnson. And I will say that I don't want Brother Johnson to be lonely up there. We have some other distinguished legislators and public servants going back, into colonial times in the state. And I hope we'll have some company for him, but I think it's just wonderful we're starting with Rogers Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Senator Rosenwald.
Mr. President, very briefly, when I was first elected and put on the Health Committee in the House in 2005, Rogers was a seasoned member and was extremely helpful in mentoring me. But we had another connection as well, which is that we're both from the same small hometown in New York State. And so we were able to bond over that. I think it's great that we're going to accept a portrait, and I look forward to walking by it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosenwald. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 28. Is everyone ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and Senate Bill 28 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred Senate Bill 1 FNA, an act relative to the Sununu Youth Services Center. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 3 to 1. Senator Carson for the committee.
I move Senate Bill 1 FNA ought to pass with amendment. This bill requires the closure of the Sununu Youth Services Center and sets out parameters for the contract for a replacement facility. This bill is the product of the work of many senators, House members, departments, and organizations coming together to work on a solution for this time-sensitive issue. We cannot let this facility close without a plan in place for where these children will go. We cannot put them in adult prisons or county jails. It is our responsibility to keep these children safe, so we need to extend the deadline for the closure of this facility. In addition, this bill also lays out a plan for how the new facility should be designed to protect these children and utilize the best services we have for rehabilitation. For these reasons, a majority of the Judiciary Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 1 FNA. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Birdsall to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise, and I am going to be supporting the amendment, but I will be voting against the bill. Hopefully, some of my concerns will be addressed in finance. But first of all, this is a construction, I agree with the fact that we have to extend the date out. And I agree that we need to put the money towards the design. And we eventually need a construction. The question is, where is it going to be? We don't know. We're putting together a bill for construction, but we don't know. We've heard Hampstead, we've heard Concord, we've heard Manchester. There's a conflict, I think, in the language. It says that November 1st, 2024 will be the completion date, but we only allow the governor a one-year extension from 2024 to 2025. What's going to happen in 2026, 2027, or 2028 if in the DAS says there's a possibility that it won't be completed until 2028? So what's going to happen in those 3 years? And I honestly, I can only speak for the possibility of it being in Hampstead. So the department, it took over Hampstead Hospital almost a year ago, maybe just a little over a year ago. DAHS has not contacted the selectmen, the police, in that period of time. I've recently talked to the selectmen. I've had ongoing conversations with our police department. They have major concerns. One of the things I have a concern about in the language, it says frequent visitation of family members. Well, if you have a person who's up in Coas, a young juvenile that's in the facility in Hampstead, up in Coas, how are the family? It's a 5-hour drive to Hampstead and a 5-hour drive back. That's 10 hours that the family is going to be on the road to visit their child. My biggest issue right now is the security piece of it. I've been in contact with the police, our police department. It took DHHS, and this is nothing against the state police. It's DHHS took almost 8 months to sign an MOU with the state police. State police are supposed to be taking over security of the Hampstead Hospital. And then it took a few more months for the state police to sign an MOU for Hampstead Police Department. And it's a 35-minute drive for the state police. The closest barracks is in Epping. It's a 35-minute drive for the state police. So Hampstead police are still the first responders to Hampstead Hospital. We had an incident on Friday. A young person, a juvenile, got out of Hampstead Hospital, running down East Road, one of the main streets in Hampstead. It took 12 staffers and 4 or 5 police to get her back to Hampstead Hospital. So my biggest concern right now is the security piece of this. I understand that we are going to try and address it maybe when it gets to finance. And the only other thing I have a concern about is the fiscal note. The bill itself says 15 million. The fiscal note says it could be up to 22 million. It recommends that the governor try and get some federal funds, and then the rest is going to be filled, the remainder is going to be filled by the general funds. We need to make sure, we need to have a set amount of what this is going to cost and how much is going to be on the backs of the taxpayers, and it needs to go into a fund that is dedicated only to this facility. And with that, Mr. President, I'm done. I'm going to vote for the amendment because it does give some additional security for the municipality, but I will vote against it until it comes out of finance. Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to speak on the amendment? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would thank my colleagues for her comments. I'd just like to remind everyone, we did an incredible amount of work on this particular bill, and we involved a number of different parties on this amendment. We had a working group meeting that included House members, and it was a bipartisan work group. And I think that's extremely important. But I'd like to remind all of you, this facility is scheduled to close March 23rd, 2023. That was in the budget last year, that was passed in the last biennium. Unfortunately, a bill did come forward and it failed in the committee of conference. So we are pretty much a year behind on getting this done. And I know my colleague from District 19, it's, okay, brought up a couple of issues, and I'd like to, if I can, respond to those. The idea of visitation and the amount of time it will take someone, if they're from Coos County and their child is incarcerated in this facility. If we don't extend this date out, those children are going to be going out of state. They're going out of state because we will not have a facility for them. So think about the connections between parent and child having to go out of state, or if their friends want to come visit them. I think that is a bigger burden than having to drive maybe 5 hours to see their children in a facility and that's an if, because the governor has not told us definitively where this is going. So please consider that. And I know the issue of security is a big issue. I'd like to remind all of you that Hampstead Hospital is not a secure facility, but this one will be. And in the amendment is language discussing that they will have a state-of-the-art security system. And I would like to remind everybody, we are at the beginning of this process. Senator Birdsall could be entirely right. It's going to go beyond. But beyond the 2024 date. But don't forget, we are only here for 2 years. And if it needs to be extended out, the next legislature can do that. But right now, we have to resolve the issue of the date, and we've got to get going on this process. And I hope you all can support the amendment as well as the bill. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The question is on the amendment. Senator D'Alessandro to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the amendment and thank the committee for their work. I think the work has been done well, due diligence, et cetera, et cetera. This is the third time that we've addressed this problem since I've been in the legislature. We closed the Toby School. We sent people to what was going to be the new savior, and that was the new Sununu Center. The Sununu Center cost us about $30 million by the time it was finished. Now we're going to close it. In the amended bill, The dates are unrealistic. I don't think there's any question about that. We cannot make those dates. They're very difficult, very difficult. The cost factor, we got 15 million from our funds set aside. It's an open-end situation with regard to general funds, the rest of the money. What are you talking about? We're talking about a $20 million expenditure, at least a $20 million expenditure. Where's it going to be? Is it going to be in Hampstead? Is it going to be in Manchester? Is it going to be in Concord? All subject to open, it's an open question. Where's it going to be? We're going from a facility that we once had in Manchester to a facility of 8 with the ability to upgrade it to what? To 12 to 18 max. Tremendous amount of flexibility there. Who are the youngsters that are going to be here, that are going to be in this facility? As I said, this is the third time that we have made an attempt to solve this problem that I'm aware of. And right now, we have spent in excess of $40 billion to solve the problem. All that's going out down the drain. And we're starting new. We're starting new to solve a problem that we knew existed a long time ago. We've got to support the amendment because it's got to be solved. It's got to be solved. But the question is, what's the cost? What's going to be the ultimate result? Where's it going to be? How's it going to be staffed? What's the security? All unanswered questions. The bill is coming to finance. I'm not sure finance can solve all of these problems, but indeed they have got to be looked at. They have got to be looked at. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Carson, further?
Mr. President, I'd like to address my colleagues' concerns. And I know that I have the same concerns as well, but I'd like to point you to the calendar on page, these aren't, with the amendment. It is in section 7, part 3. It says, in relinquishing the property, the return of the property to an entity that will enhance the tax and business tax rolls of the city of Manchester and the state of New Hampshire shall be a high priority. And the reason why we put that in there is we know that where the current center is a high value piece of property, and we want to make sure that that money is going to come back to the state to offset the cost of building this new center. And I think that that's an idea that once it gets into finance can be fleshed out even more with probably some stronger language. But for right now, I think saying something like this, we are letting everyone know that what the intent of the proceeds of the profits from the sale of the piece of property where it will go. Thank you, Mr. President.
The bill is still on second reading. Is there further discussion on the amendments? Senator D'Alessandro again.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Carson, for your comments. I appreciate them very much. Let me just say that 4 times we have cut out pieces of the property at what is now the Youth Development Center, and we have sold it. We took the deputy administrator's home, we cut that out, and we sold that house. There was another house on North River Road. We cut that out. There was another facility on North River Road with young women who helped. We cut that out. So that's 3 times we have cut out pieces of the Youth Development Center and sold that property to the buyer, and money's come to the state. By the way, it took us so long to sell it that we lost about $100,000 in value by delaying it. All right, that's done. Then we sold the superintendent's house. That was the first one. So 4 times we've sold property and we've cut it out. And by cutting it out, all of the property, or a great deal of property that's on the main road, is cut out. So if we're talking about then looking at the use for the rest of the property, some of it's wetlands. There are buildings on that property that need to be taken down if indeed you're going to do it, never mind the main building, but there are other buildings that have been used by police for training, et cetera. So that's a monumental situation and something that really is going to take a lot of time and effort to solve. But I spent a lot of time on this issue over the years, a lot of time on this issue. And it's a troublesome piece of property. It has enormous value, enormous value. The question is, how are you going to use it? And that is the $64 question. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Senator Whitley.
Mr. President, I rise in support of Senate Bill 1. I rise for the children who have been exposed to significant trauma in and outside the Sununu Youth Services Center. And I rise for the children who deserve to get the care that they so desperately need. I think it's important to ground ourselves today that we have come to this point after decades of documented and deeply troubling abuse at the Sununu Center. As a young lawyer, I conducted some of those investigations at the Sununu Center and represented many of the children who have ended up at this facility. What I know is that the overwhelming majority of these children have complex behavioral and mental health needs, disabilities, and significant exposure to abuse and neglect and trauma. That makes these children our most vulnerable children here. That's what we're talking about with this facility. Money matters, security matters, but to me, what is most important are these children. While these children are often difficult, we know this, they deserve our compassion, our support, and our commitment to do better. Thankfully, an incredible amount of work and investment has been done in our state to build a system where children can get what they need when they need it, so they don't end up in our emergency rooms or in the Sununu Center. As a result of critical reforms adopted by the legislature, led by many of my colleagues in this chamber, New Hampshire is now on a path to providing children with the appropriate services to avoid delinquency and to connect children with services after involvement with the juvenile justice system. This bill goes a long way to furthering that work. What is most encouraging to me about this legislation is the deep connection it makes between New Hampshire's juvenile justice system and New Hampshire's system of care for children with significant behavioral and mental health needs. This legislation is an important step in the right direction because it will keep our children and our community safe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Further discussion? Seeing none. The question is on the adoption of ought to pass as amended. There, a roll call has been requested. Is it seconded? Seconded by, the motion was made by Senator Whitley, seconded by Senator Susi. Are you ready for the roll call? Clerk will call the roll.
Senator Gendreau.
Yes.
Senator Lang. Yes. Senator Waters. Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray. Senator Innes.
Yes.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Brichardi.
Yes.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chanley. Senator Avard.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald. Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Whitley. Yes. Senator Murphy.
Yes.
Senator Pearl. Senator Susi.
Yes.
Senator Bertzel. Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Kwoka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas,
No.
Senator Gannon,
Yes.
Senator Altschiller, Senator Bradley.
Yes. The ayes have it, 22 to 2. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted, and Senate Bill 1 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred Senate Bill 43, an act relative to needs assessment for juvenile minors who are residents of New Hampshire. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 43 ought to pass. This bill clarifies that the juvenile justice voluntary needs assessment are for resident minors. The intention of this assessment is to evaluate the individual needs of a minor as they become involved with the juvenile justice system. However, current law makes it so that offenders from out of state are given this assessment as well. Minors from out of state are not able to utilize the services DHHS could provide simply because they are from out of state and unavailable to receive those needed services. This bill simply clarifies that the child who is given the needs assessment is from New Hampshire, and they will be staying here to get the services they need. For this reason, the majority of the committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 43. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 43. Is everyone ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 43 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred Senate Bill 59, an act relative to the Director of Charitable Trusts. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Chanley for the committee.
Senator Chan.
I move Senate Bill 59 ought to pass. This bill permits the Director of Charitable Trusts to compel entities or evidence to appear or be produced at such times and places as the Attorney General may designate. Currently, the Attorney General must reserve a room at the State House to take a meeting to investigate charitable trusts. This bill would remove that requirement and allow the AG to conduct these investigations at the Attorney General's office or wherever the AG sees fit. For this reason, a majority of the Judiciary Committee asks for your support on the motion ought to pass on Senate Bill 59. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chanley. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 59. Is everyone ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted and ordered to third reading. Now, Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to request a 3-minute recess, please.
Senate will be in recess for 3 minutes. The Senate will come out of recess. Without objection, Senate Bill 47 will be special ordered to the next session. We are now at the conclusion of the regular calendar, and we will take up the bills that were removed from the consent calendar. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 39FN, relative to criminal history checks for school transportation monitors. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 5-0. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ward was going to speak on this, so I apologize for this. I'm sorry? Yep, I'm running to it. Trying to find my blurb. Thank you, sir. Senate Bill 39 requires that transportation monitors undergo a criminal background check before being employed by public schools. This is seeking to close an inadvertent gap in child safety created by a bill from 2020, which assumed that transportation monitors fell under the purview of the Division of Motor Vehicles. Upon review, the Department of Education and DMV realized that transportation monitors were not under DMV's purview and should be reviewed by the Department for compliance with RSA 189:13-A, Roman numeral 5. And there is an amendment to the bill as well.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? I recognize Senator Ward for a floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to introduce amendment to 2023-0054S.
Senator Ward. Senator Ward has introduced the floor amendment. Would you like to speak to the amendment? Yes.
Thank you, Senator President. Yes, in the bill on line 22, I believe it's page 2, the monitors, the school bus monitors have been included in the bill. Strike the monitor, and it should just be school bus driver, criminal history records check.
Is there any further discussion on floor amendment 54? Senator Gannon.
Just a question for the good senator from 8. Senator Wood. I'm just confused because I introduced it at someone's request, this bill. Are we not going to look into the background now of monitors and do a review of them?
This was, thank you, Senator from District 23. This was on the request from the Department of Education, and they have looked it over. The school bus monitors were added to it and actually left in the thing, and the monitors should be not part of it. It should be struck out. It's just the school bus driver. There'll be another thing for the bus monitor.
Another thing's coming. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much. Is everyone ready for the question on floor amendment 54? All in favor of floor amendment 54, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading. It's still open for further discussion, and it's still open for amendment. Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 39. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. The bill is ordered to third reading. We've special ordered the other bill on the consent calendar. So now, the best part of the day, I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the early session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time, that all bills and resolutions ordered to third reading be, by this resolution, read a third time, all titles be the same as adopted, and that they be passed at the present time.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The early session is adjourned. We are now in the late session. Are there any announcements or personal privileges to come before the Senate? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent. Mr. President, while we were away, a couple of people passed that played a significant role in this Senate. Dr. Jim Squires passed away. Dr. Squires was just as elegant a human being as you would ever want to know. I knew his father when his father was at Colby Sawyer College. His father was an eminent historian, Senator Waters, an eminent historian. And Jim Squires went to the Naval Academy. He left the Naval Academy because he wanted to pursue medicine. He became a physician. He opened, I think, the first HMO in the country, right? Where he wanted to serve and take care of people. He sat right down at that end, and he was just as elegant as they could make him. Jim Squires was the epitome of a New Hampshire senator, the epitome of a New Hampshire senator. His wife was my classmate at the University of New Hampshire, class of 1961. She bled blue and white, just like I do. She was very helpful to me in raising some money for the university for a particular cause. But Jim Squires was the best. The best. That was a terrible loss for us. He had lost his wife, and he was in failing health toward the end of his time on this earth. But Jim Squires, a name that we should remember, a person that we should look up to, and a person that we should try to emulate as we move forward. Secondly, Doug Wheeler. Doug Wheeler was Katie Wheeler's husband. Had him in class at the University of New Hampshire. Great history teacher, particularly as it related to the Iberian Peninsula. He was a real expert on Portuguese history. The beautiful and talented Katie, and they say that's a sexist remark, but there are some beautiful and talented men also. I'll say that for the canon. But Katie sat beside me for a number of years, and I was just saying to Senator Perkins Kwoka that she's now the seventh one who sat in that seat beside me here in the Senate. Katie, an extraordinary lady, and Doug, an extraordinary guy. He had a heart attack. They were not able to do anything to rectify his heart, so they sent him home, and he died in hospice. A wonderful guy, married to a wonderful lady who gave great contributions to this Senate and to the state of New Hampshire. So two lovely, lovely, reliable people. And I take this last moment, Mr. President, to say thank you to the staff of the New Hampshire Senate, the clerk and the members of the clerk's staff, and to all of the workers. I had a terrible accident this year, a terrible accident. I had no knowledge of the fact that if I didn't have surgery, I was going to die. I had the surgery, and the response by people from the Senate, our staff, and particularly the workers, was just heartwarming for me. So I can't thank them enough for everything they did for me. My colleagues, my Senate colleagues, just thank you. Thank you. And sometimes you go through some difficult times, and it's that spirit of help and that spirit of I'm with you to the end that makes it livable and workable. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. I'm going to have a inspiration of the week from the Senate President remark during this session. And Senator D, you get the inspiration of the week. You've inspired all of us to just keep getting after it. God bless you. Senator Perkins, Kwoka.
Well, thank you for those heartfelt remarks, Senator D'Alessandro. I just wanted to take a moment, a personal privilege to remember together Dr. Jeffrey Clark, who I think some of you have heard, unfortunately also passed recently, who was the husband of my predecessor, Senator Martha Fuller Clark. And so we had a tough weekend in District 21 a couple weeks ago, losing Doug Wheeler and Dr. Clark, but I just wanted to share a couple memories of him. I know many of you may even have known him much longer than I did. But, you know, I think Dr. Clark was always just a man of grace and a man of humor and a man of wit. And we all know, I know we spoke together about this on Organization Day, that it's not just us who serve, you know, it's our families who serve alongside of us. And I think for many years, even though he was extremely accomplished in his own field, you know, I think Dr. Clark was an extremely supportive spouse to Martha. And I have spent many, many hours at Martha's house learning about policy and just the experience of being here in the Senate. And during all of those hours, I was always struck by how Jeff would come in and check on Martha and see if she needed a warm cup of tea or a snack or anything. And so, you know, his kindness was evident. And I think all of us on the Seacoast have just benefited tremendously from knowing both Martha and Jeff. And so I know it will be a real loss to her. You know, my thoughts are with her, and I hope you'll join me in just remembering him this week. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Carson for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually have two announcements. First, I'd like to remind everybody that our financial statements are due by tomorrow, January 20th. So please, if you have not done so, get it done. And finally, I'd like to remind everyone that 2 o'clock today, we have our essential training, and we are all required to attend. And that training is going to take place in State House Room 100. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Are there any further announcements or personal privileges? So let me just do some thank yous. We had deadlines this week. The staff at OLS had to get a lot of our bills out. So our thanks to the Office of Legislative Services for making that happen. Chairs should have bills so that they can be noticed for next week in the calendar. And I want to thank each and every one of you for assiduously signing off on your bills and your co-sponsor requests. And now, Senator Avard, I'd like you to come up here because we have something really special to do today. Yep. Senator Avard is going to lead us in a rousing happy birthday to Maureen. Senator Avard. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Maureen. Happy birthday to you. Without objections, all personal privileges, especially the last one for Maureen, or unanimous consent or other remarks shall be entered into the permanent journal of the Senate. Is there any further business to come before the Senate? Oh, I apologize. We have another congratulations, and that's to Molly. Molly just graduated from St. A's. So let's give her a round of applause. And now, seeing the really great things of the day from Molly and Maureen, is there any further business to come before the Senate today? Seeing none, I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the business of the day being completed, that the Senate recess to the call of the chair for the purposes of introducing legislation, re-referring bills to committee, scheduling hearings, sending and receiving messages, vacating bills, and processing enrolled bill reports and amendments. And when we recess to the call of the chair.
All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The Senate is in recess to the call of the chair.